Marcus Thompson froze mid-swing, the leather belt suspended in the air like a question mark above the cowering German Shepherd puppy. His bloodshot eyes locked with those of Captain Rex, the old war dog who had seen too many battles, lost too many brothers, and now watched his 5-month-old daughter Hope tremble beneath the shadow of violence. This wasn't discipline. This was revenge. Eleanor Thompson's coffee mug shattered against the kitchen floor, the sound echoing through the Montana ranch house like a gunshot. From her window, the 67-year-old widow watched her son, her decorated veteran son, raise his hand against an innocent creature barely old enough to bark. Rex's muscles coiled beneath his battle-scarred coat. The same tension that had saved 23 soldiers in Afghanistan now focused on one helpless puppy. His graying muzzle lifted slightly, revealing teeth that had never been turned on family. Until now. "Marcus, stop!" Eleanor's voice cracked across the yard. But something had already broken in that moment, something that 3 generations of loyalty, buried secrets from a desert war, and the unconditional love between a mother and child would either heal or destroy forever. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. The Big Sky Ranch stretched across 4,000 acres of Montana's most unforgiving terrain, where the closest neighbor lived 45 miles away, and winter storms could cut off the outside world for weeks. 3 generations of Thompsons had carved their legacy from this harsh land, but now that legacy balanced on the edge of extinction, weighed down by $380,000 in crushing debt and the ghosts of wars both foreign and domestic. Eleanor Ellie Thompson had arrived 6 months ago, a widow carrying secrets heavier than her single suitcase. At 67, the former Army nurse possessed the kind of strength forged in field hospitals during her late husband William's tours in Vietnam. Her steel-gray hair was always pulled back in a practical bun, her weathered hands steady despite the tremor that appeared when she thought no one was watching. What Marcus didn't know, what no one knew except the old German shepherd who followed her shadow, was that Ellie's mind had begun its own quiet rebellion. Early-stage Alzheimer's crept through her memories like morning fog, stealing moments and faces with ruthless precision. "I've patched up enough broken souls to recognize another one," she often said, studying her son with the clinical eye of someone who had seen too much suffering. Captain Rex bore the scars of 3 tours in Afghanistan etched across his magnificent frame. At 9 years old, the German shepherd carried himself with military bearing despite the shrapnel scar that traced from his left ear to his muzzle and the slight limp that marked where an IED fragment had found its mark. His piercing blue eyes missed nothing, not the way Ellie sometimes forgot to turn off the stove, not the empty whiskey bottles Marcus thought he'd hidden, not the way little Hope flinched at loud noises. Rex had been trained to detect explosives, but trauma had taught him to detect something far more dangerous, the moment when a good man begins to break. Hope represented everything innocent in a world gone mad. At 5 months old, Rex's daughter was all oversized paws and boundless curiosity, her black and tan coat gleaming with youth and possibility. One ear flopped while the other stood at attention, giving her a perpetually questioning expression that melted hearts and broke them simultaneously. She trusted completely, loved unconditionally, and had no understanding that the man who fed her was the same one who hurt her. Marcus Thompson stood at the center of this fractured constellation, a 42-year-old former Army captain whose decorations couldn't stop the nightmares or fill the hole where his marriage used to be. His broad shoulders, once squared with military pride, now curved inward under invisible weight. Alcohol had become his closest companion since returning from Afghanistan. But even whiskey couldn't drown the voices of the men he couldn't save or silence the questions that haunted every sleepless night. The ranch was failing, the bank was circling, and dangerous men from Billings had begun making phone calls about payment schedules and consequences. In this isolated corner of Montana, where cell towers were scarce and help was measured in hours rather than minutes, 4 souls struggled with demons both seen and unseen, unaware that their salvation or destruction would come from the most unlikely source of all. The morning sun cast long shadows across the ranch kitchen as Eleanor carefully cracked eggs into the cast-iron skillet, her movements deliberate and practiced. The familiar routine grounded her when the fog rolled in, those moments when familiar faces became strangers and simple tasks transformed into insurmountable puzzles. She had been making breakfast for 70 years, first for her brothers, then for William, and now for Marcus. Some memories, thankfully, lived in her hands rather than her mind. The acrid smell of burning butter snapped her back to the present. The pan was smoking, the eggs already blackened beyond rescue. Eleanor stared at the ruined meal, confusion clouding her features like storm clouds gathering over the mountains. Her hand trembled as she reached for the pan handle. Captain Rex appeared at her side with the silent efficiency of his military training, his substantial body gently nudging her away from the stove. Without fanfare, he used his nose to turn off the gas burner, then stood between Eleanor and the smoking pan until she stepped back. It was a dance they had performed dozens of times, though Eleanor rarely remembered the previous rehearsals. "Oh, Rex," she whispered, her voice thick with gratitude and shame. "What would I do without you, old boy?" Hope bounded into the kitchen at that moment, her puppy energy filling the room like sunshine. Still unsteady on legs that seemed too long for her compact body, she skidded across the linoleum and collided with Marcus's chair just as he lifted his coffee mug to his lips. The hot liquid splashed across his work shirt, soaking through the fabric to his skin beneath. "Jesus Christ!" Marcus exploded, jumping to his feet as the coffee burned his chest. The ceramic mug shattered against the floor, sending fragments across the kitchen tiles. His bloodshot eyes, already raw from another sleepless night, focused on the cowering puppy with laser intensity. "That damn mutt ruins everything!" The transformation was instantaneous and terrifying. The man who had once led soldiers through the most dangerous regions of Afghanistan drew back his boot and drove it into Hope's small ribcage. The puppy's yelp of pain cut through the morning air like a blade, her tiny body flying across the kitchen to crash against the cabinet doors. Rex's reaction was immediate. A low growl rumbled from deep in his chest, not the playful warning of a family pet, but the controlled menace of a warrior who had faced enemies in the mountains of the Hindu Kush. His hackles rose as he positioned himself between Marcus and the whimpering puppy, his blue eyes locked on the man who had just crossed an invisible line. "Marcus Thompson!" Eleanor's voice cracked like a whip across the tension-filled kitchen. Whatever confusion had clouded her mind moments before was burned away by maternal fury. "What in God's name has gotten into you?" But Marcus was already storming toward the door, his face flushed with rage and something deeper, a self-loathing that had been eating him alive for months. "Everything in this damn place is falling apart," he shouted, slamming the screen door so hard it bounced back open. "Just like everything else I touch." Eleanor knelt beside Hope, her nurse's training taking over as she gently probed the puppy's ribs for breaks. Hope whimpered but allowed the examination, pressing closer to the old woman's warmth. Rex stood guard over both of them, his attention split between his injured daughter and the retreating figure of the man he had once served with unwavering loyalty. Later that morning, while Marcus worked off his fury repairing fence posts in the far pasture, Eleanor made a discovery that chilled her to the bone. Hidden beneath a stack of feed invoices in Marcus's cluttered desk, she found the foreclosure notice, 30 days. The bank was giving them 30 days before seizing the ranch that had been in the Thompson family for 3 generations. Her hands shook as she read further. Collection letters from companies she'd never heard of, each one more threatening than the last. One name appeared repeatedly: Jake Morrison, with a Billings phone number and messages about payment schedules and consequences for defaulting. The most recent letter, dated just 3 days ago, contained only 7 words that made Eleanor's blood run cold. "Time's up, Marcus. We'll be calling." The phone rang as if summoned by her fears. Eleanor hesitated, then lifted the receiver with trembling fingers. "Thompson Ranch." Her voice was steadier than she felt. "Is Marcus there?" The voice was silk over steel, polite but carrying an undertone that made Rex's ears perk up from across the room. He's working. May I take a message?" A pause, then a chuckle that contained no humor. "Tell him Jake Morrison called. Tell him we'll be settling accounts real soon. And, Mrs. Thompson, make sure he gets that message, for everyone's sake." The line went dead, leaving Eleanor staring at the receiver as the full magnitude of their situation crashed over her like an avalanche. Her son wasn't just drinking himself to death. He had brought something dark and dangerous to their doorstep, and now they were all in its shadow. The midnight air carried the bite of approaching winter as Eleanor wandered through the darkness in her thin cotton pajamas, her bare feet finding their way along familiar paths that existed more in muscle memory than conscious thought. The fog had rolled in thick and merciless, stealing not just her sense of direction, but her understanding of where, or when, she was. In her confused mind, she was 25 again, searching for William's tent in the chaos of a field hospital in Da Nang, the sound of helicopter rotors echoing in her ears. 2 miles from the ranch house, Eleanor stumbled over a cattle guard and fell to her knees on the frozen ground. The sharp cold cut through the haze of confusion, and for a terrifying moment she had no idea where she was or how she had gotten there. The Montana landscape stretched endlessly in all directions, alien and hostile under the star-drunk sky. Captain Rex found her there, his military training and heightened senses cutting through the darkness like a beacon. He approached carefully, his warm breath visible in the frigid air as he assessed the situation with tactical precision. Without ceremony, he positioned himself beside the shivering woman, his substantial body providing warmth while his gentle pressure guided her to her feet. Hope trotted behind them, her small form barely visible in the darkness, but her loyalty to Rex absolute. The return journey took 40 minutes, Rex setting a pace that accommodated Eleanor's shuffling gait while maintaining constant vigilance for hazards in their path. He guided her around fence posts and cattle guards, steered her away from the icy creek that cut across the lower pasture, and twice stopped entirely when her strength faltered. Hope stayed close, her puppy instincts telling her that something was wrong, that the old woman who gave her treats and belly rubs was somehow lost even though they were on familiar ground. Marcus was stumbling out the kitchen door, a bottle of Jack Daniels in one hand and truck keys in the other, when the unlikely procession emerged from the darkness. His alcohol-clouded brain struggled to process the scene. His mother in her nightgown, the old German shepherd acting as her guide, the puppy trailing behind like a small shadow. The whiskey made everything seem surreal, dreamlike, but the cold bite of fear in his chest was brutally real. "What the hell?" Marcus's words slurred as he dropped the bottle, bourbon splashing across the porch steps. "Ma, what are you doing out here? It's below freezing." Eleanor looked at him with eyes that held no recognition, her face blank with confusion. "I'm looking for the medical tent," she said with heartbreaking clarity. "The wounded are coming in and I can't find William anywhere." The words hit Marcus like shrapnel. His mother's confusion, Rex's protective positioning, the way the old dog had clearly saved Eleanor from hypothermia, or worse, it all coalesced into a truth he couldn't accept. In his alcohol-soaked rage, he chose the easiest target for his fury. "You son of a bitch!" Marcus roared at Rex, his voice carrying across the silent ranch like a gunshot. "You lured her out there. You're trying to kill her just like you killed my men." Rex's ears flattened against his skull, his body language shifting from protective to confused. The military commands in Marcus's voice triggered ingrained responses, but the accusation made no sense. The old dog had saved Eleanor's life, just as he had saved 23 soldiers in Afghanistan. His blue eyes searched Marcus's face for understanding, finding only misplaced hatred. "In Afghanistan," Marcus continued, his voice breaking with years of suppressed anguish, "I watched good men die because you weren't fast enough, weren't smart enough, weren't worth a damn when it mattered." The words poured out like poison from an infected wound. "Rodriguez, Patterson, Miller, they all died because you missed that IED. 23 men came home, but 12 didn't, and it's your fault." Eleanor's confusion cleared like morning fog as she watched her son destroy everything good with his pain. "Marcus, stop this right now," she commanded with the authority of someone who had commanded respect in operating theaters and trauma units. "That dog saved my life tonight. He's been protecting me for months." But Marcus was beyond reason, lost in a wilderness of guilt and whiskey and financial desperation. The phone call from Jake Morrison echoed in his mind. 48 hours until collection, consequences for default, ways to settle debts that didn't require money. The dog-fighting contacts in Billings had made their interest clear. A trained military German shepherd would bring serious money, enough to buy time if not freedom. "Rex has to go," Marcus declared with the finality of a death sentence. "I've already made the arrangements. Guy from Billings will be here tomorrow evening to take him. The puppy, too." Eleanor's blood turned to ice. "You can't separate them. They're family. They're animals, Ma." Marcus's voice cracked with desperation. "It's them or us. Jake Morrison doesn't care about dogs or feelings or anything else. He wants his money, and if I don't have it, people are going to get hurt. Real people." Rex seemed to understand the threat in Marcus's tone, his military training attuned to the nuances of command and danger. His body tensed as he positioned himself between Marcus and Hope, every instinct screaming that his daughter was in mortal peril. The old warrior had faced Taliban insurgents and improvised explosives, but nothing had prepared him for betrayal from within his own pack. Hope pressed against Rex's flank, sensing the change in atmosphere even if she couldn't understand the words. Her trusting eyes looked up at Marcus, the man who fed her, the man who hurt her, the man who was now planning to sell her into a world of violence and death. The countdown had begun, and none of them fully understood how little time they had left. Eleanor's hands shook as she closed the laptop, the glow of the screen fading to black in the dim light of the ranch office. 3 hours of research had painted a picture so horrifying that her mind, even compromised as it was, couldn't fully process the implications. Dog-fighting rings, training camps where animals were systematically brutalized to create killing machines. Videos of German shepherds, noble creatures like Rex, being torn apart by pit bulls bred for violence while crowds of men cheered and money changed hands. The website spoke in coded language about prospects and trainers, but the reality was clear enough. Rex's military training, his size and intelligence would make him valuable not as a fighter, but as a bait dog, used to train younger, more aggressive animals by serving as their victim. The thought of those gentle blue eyes filled with terror instead of loyalty made Eleanor's stomach clench with nausea. Tommy Bear Claw found her there at dawn, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks as she stared at printed pages that detailed the horrors awaiting Rex and Hope. The 60-year-old Blackfeet ranch hand had worked for the Thompson family for 15 years, and his weathered face had never shown the kind of raw emotion that now twisted his features. "Mrs. Thompson," Tommy said quietly, his calloused hands gentle as he helped her to her feet. "I've been watching. I've been documenting. What Marcus is doing to those dogs, it ain't right and it ain't legal." From beneath his flannel shirt, Tommy produced a small digital camera, its memory card filled with evidence that could save Rex and Hope or destroy what remained of the Thompson family. Video clips showed Marcus withholding food from the dogs for days, forcing them to drink from puddles while fresh water sat in nearby bowls. Images captured Hope cowering in corners, her small body marked with bruises that no 5-month-old puppy should carry. Most damning of all was footage of Rex's daily humiliation, the proud military dog forced to submit to abuse from the man he had once protected with his life. "We got maybe 18 hours before those men from Billings show up," Tommy continued, his voice heavy with the weight of difficult decisions. "Cell service is spotty up here, but there's a ranger station about 20 miles south. We could get word to authorities, but..." The unspoken truth hung between them like smoke from a dying fire. Authorities meant investigations, questions about Eleanor's condition, potential charges against Marcus that would destroy any chance of family reconciliation. The ranch was already circling the drain financially. A scandal would finish it completely. Eleanor's Alzheimer's symptoms had worsened under the crushing stress of the past few days. She would find herself in rooms with no memory of how she'd gotten there, holding objects whose purpose eluded her, staring at faces that should have been familiar but seemed foreign and threatening. Yet in moments of crystalline clarity, her mind functioned with the sharp precision that had once saved lives in military hospitals. "Tommy," she said with sudden decisiveness, "we're going to save them both. I don't care what it costs." The alliance formed in whispers and careful planning. Tommy knew every back road and hidden trail on the vast ranch property. Eleanor retained enough of her nursing knowledge to assess injuries and provide basic medical care. Most importantly, they both understood that Rex and Hope trusted them in ways they no longer trusted Marcus. Rex had begun what could only be described as survival training with Hope, though the puppy had no understanding of the life and death stakes involved. In the relative safety of the old barn, the veteran dog taught his daughter to remain completely still at the sound of approaching footsteps, to hide in the shadows beneath farm equipment, to respond to hand signals rather than voice commands that might be overheard. Hope approached these lessons as games, her tail wagging with innocent enthusiasm even as Rex's expression grew increasingly grave. The old warrior understood what awaited them both in the fighting rings of Billings. He had seen enough violence in Afghanistan to recognize it in new forms, and every protective instinct honed by military training now focused on ensuring his daughter's survival. Dr. Sarah Chen's surprise visit on the 5th day nearly derailed their careful plans. The veterinarian arrived unannounced, her professional smile faltering as she observed Hope's condition during what Marcus insisted was a routine wellness check. The puppy's weight loss was obvious, her coat dull and patchy, her behavior skittish in ways that spoke to systematic abuse rather than normal puppy energy. "Marcus," Dr. Chen said carefully, her hands gentle as she examined Hope's ribs, "I'm seeing some concerning signs here. Has she been eating normally? Any changes in behavior or energy levels?" Marcus's paranoia flared like a struck match. This woman, with her probing questions and professional obligations to report suspected abuse, represented a threat he couldn't control or intimidate. "She's fine," he snapped, his voice carrying the edge of barely contained violence. "Just growing pains. Nothing that requires outside interference." Dr. Chen's trained eye caught the fear in Hope's posture, the way she pressed against Rex's protective bulk whenever Marcus moved too quickly. More telling was Rex's behavior, the military dog's hypervigilance, his positioning to shield the puppy from potential threats, the way his intelligent eyes tracked every movement in the room as if assessing tactical situations. "I'd like to schedule a follow-up in a week," Dr. Chen pressed, making notes that would never see the light of day. "Just to monitor her development and—" "Won't be necessary," Marcus cut her off, his tone brooking no argument. "We're making some changes around here, reducing overhead, streamlining operations. Veterinary visits will be handled in Billings from now on." The dismissal was clear, but Dr. Chen caught Eleanor's eye as she packed her equipment. The brief exchange spoke volumes. One medical professional recognizing another's distress, understanding that sometimes the most important diagnoses couldn't be written in official charts. As evening approached, the ranch took on the oppressive atmosphere of a place under siege. Marcus's drinking had escalated to the point where he barely functioned, stumbling through chores with the mechanical precision of muscle memory, while his mind retreated into darker territories. The phone rang constantly now, Jake Morrison's associates checking and double-checking arrangements, dog-fighting contacts confirming pickup times and payment schedules. Eleanor found herself fighting two battles simultaneously: the advancing fog of Alzheimer's that threatened to steal her ability to help Rex and Hope, and the crushing weight of watching her son transform into someone she no longer recognized. The man who had once carried wounded soldiers to safety now planned to deliver innocent animals into the hands of monsters for money. Rex seemed to sense the approaching crisis with the same intuition that had served him in combat zones. His patrol patterns around the ranch became more systematic, his protective positioning around Eleanor and Hope more pronounced. He no longer responded to Marcus's commands with military precision, instead assessing each order for potential threat to those under his protection. Hope, despite her youth, had begun to mirror her father's alertness. The playful puppy energy that had once filled the ranch with joy was replaced by cautious observation and careful movement. She stayed close to Rex's shadow, her developing senses attuned to the subtle changes in atmosphere that preceded violence. Tommy Bear Claw made his final preparations as darkness fell across the Montana landscape. The weather forecast called for clear skies, good for visibility, but bad for cover. The ranger station remained their best hope for outside help, but 20 miles of mountain roads in winter conditions would test every survival skill he'd learned growing up on the reservation. Eleanor sat in the kitchen, her mind cycling between devastating clarity and merciful confusion. In her lucid moments, she understood exactly what was at stake: the lives of two innocent animals, the soul of her troubled son, and the legacy of a family that had survived 3 generations of hardship only to face destruction from within. As midnight approached, Jake Morrison's final call confirmed what they all feared. The collection would happen the next evening, regardless of weather, circumstances, or consequences. The countdown had reached single digits, and salvation, if it existed, would require the kind of courage that transforms ordinary people into heroes. Rex settled beside Eleanor's chair, his warm presence an anchor in the storm of approaching chaos. Hope curled against his flank, trusting completely in her father's ability to protect her from dangers she couldn't yet comprehend. Outside, the Montana wind carried the promise of winter's full fury, but inside the ranch house, 2 species prepared to fight for something more precious than warmth or shelter: the bonds of love that make family worth saving. The storm that meteorologists had been tracking across the northern Rockies arrived with the fury of nature unleashed, transforming the Montana landscape into a frozen battleground where visibility dropped to mere yards and roads became impassable ribbons of ice and snow. Inside the ranch house, 3 black SUVs materialized through the blizzard like harbingers of doom, their headlights cutting through the whiteout conditions with predatory precision. Jake Morrison stepped from the lead vehicle, his expensive overcoat doing little to protect against the brutal wind that howled across the open range. At 55, he carried himself with the confident swagger of a man who had built an empire on others' desperation, his cold eyes assessing the Thompson Ranch like a predator evaluating wounded prey. Behind him emerged two enforcers whose bulk and bearing suggested military backgrounds corrupted by greed and violence. The third vehicle disgorged a figure that made Rex's hackles rise from his position inside the kitchen. Vincent "Viper" Corallo was legendary in underground fighting circles, a man whose scarred hands had trained hundreds of dogs for combat, while his dead eyes had watched thousands more die for sport and profit. His presence meant the transaction would be immediate. Rex and Hope would disappear into the night, swallowed by a world where their only value lay in their capacity for suffering. Eleanor experienced one of her most severe Alzheimer's episodes at the worst possible moment. The stress of the approaching confrontation combined with the storm's atmospheric pressure to send her mind spiraling into a labyrinth of confusion where faces became unfamiliar and voices carried no meaning. She sat in her rocking chair beside the fireplace, her vacant eyes staring at strangers who spoke in threatening tones about business she couldn't comprehend. "Mrs.
Thompson."
Jake Morrison's voice carried false courtesy as he removed his snow-covered hat.
"I apologize for the late hour, but business doesn't wait for convenient weather."
His gaze swept the room, cataloging valuable items with the practiced efficiency of a man who collected debts through any means necessary. "I trust Marcus has explained the situation to you?" Eleanor's response was a blank stare, her mind unable to process the danger that filled her living room like smoke from a poison fire. In her confusion, these men might have been doctors from the military hospital, or neighbors checking on her welfare, or complete strangers whose presence meant nothing at all. Her protective instincts, normally sharp despite her condition, lay dormant under the weight of cognitive chaos. Marcus stood in the doorway like a man facing his own execution, the bottle of whiskey in his trembling hands providing no comfort against the magnitude of what he was about to do. The alcohol that had numbed his conscience for months now seemed powerless against the crushing reality of betraying the animals who trusted him, the mother who needed him, and the memory of the soldier he used to be. "The dogs are in the barn," he said quietly, his voice barely audible above the storm's roar. "Rex is... He's been difficult lately, aggressive. The puppy's healthier, easier to handle." Viper Corallo's laugh contained no humor, only the cold assessment of professional cruelty. "I've handled plenty of difficult dogs, Mr. Thompson. Military training just makes them more valuable once we break that spirit." His scarred fingers flexed unconsciously, anticipating the challenge of reducing a proud war veteran to a cowering victim. "The old ones fight hardest at first, but they all learn their place eventually." Rex heard every word through the kitchen door, his military intelligence processing the threat assessment with devastating clarity. These men spoke of him as merchandise, of hope as inventory to be processed and consumed. His daughter pressed against his flank, sensing the change in his posture from protective to predatory. The old warrior's training whispered of tactical advantages and killing techniques, but his domesticated heart warred against instincts that could solve problems through violence. Tommy Bear Claw remained trapped in the bunkhouse, the storm making movement impossible while Jake Morrison's men maintained watch outside. Through the frosted window he could see the lights of the main house and knew that Eleanor and the dogs faced their greatest danger while he sat powerless to intervene. His cell phone showed no signal, the nearest tower overwhelmed by the storm's electromagnetic fury. The power failed at precisely the wrong moment, plunging the ranch into darkness broken only by the fireplace's flickering glow and the occasional flash of lightning that illuminated faces with demonic shadows. Emergency lanterns cast dancing patterns on the walls, transforming familiar rooms into alien landscapes where nothing seemed safe or certain. "Well," Jake Morrison said with calm satisfaction, "this just makes things more interesting. Viper, why don't you and the boys go collect our merchandise while I finish business with Marcus here?" He produced a leather-bound ledger from his coat, its pages filled with debts and interest calculations that transformed human desperation into mathematical precision. Your total obligation, including late fees and collection costs, comes to $437,000. Marcus's knees buckled at the figure, his already fragile grip on reality shattered by the magnitude of his failure. But we agreed. The dogs were supposed to cover most of it. Rex alone is worth $50,000 to the Fighting Rings. Was worth $50,000, Jake corrected with predatory patience. Market conditions change, Marcus. Demand fluctuates. Consider this a lesson in business economics. He gestured toward Eleanor, who sat rocking gently beside the fire, oblivious to the danger surrounding her. Fortunately, you have other assets we can discuss. The implication hit Marcus like a physical blow. These monsters weren't just taking the dogs, they were eyeing his mother, the ranch, everything that remained of his family's legacy. The whiskey-soaked fog that had clouded his judgment for months began to clear, revealing the true enormity of what he had invited into their lives. Rex made his decision in that moment of crystalline clarity that often precedes desperate action. The chains that Marcus had used to restrain him were military-grade steel, designed to hold a 100-pound dog under normal circumstances, but Rex was no longer operating under normal parameters. The supernatural strength that emergency situations sometimes unlock in parents protecting children flooded through his aging muscles as he twisted and pulled against his bonds. The first chain snapped with a sound like gunfire, then the second, then the third. Hope whimpered at the noise, pressing herself into the corner of the barn as her father transformed from protective parent into something elemental and dangerous. Rex's eyes blazed with the fury of betrayal as he stepped free from the broken restraints, every movement radiating lethal intent. Viper Corallo pushed through the barn door just as Rex completed his liberation, the scarred man's confidence evaporating when faced with 90 pounds of trained military muscle operating without restraint. "Easy, boy," he said in the tone of someone suddenly realizing they had miscalculated badly. "Nobody needs to get hurt here." But Rex was beyond commands or negotiations. He positioned himself between the intruders and Hope, his scarred muzzle pulled back to reveal teeth that had been trained for war. This wasn't the domestic dog who had patiently endured Marcus's abuse. This was Captain Rex, war veteran and protector, facing enemies who threatened his family. Inside the house, Eleanor's confusion reached a crescendo of terror as she watched strange men discuss her son's debts and her own future like merchants haggling over livestock. The faces around her swam in and out of focus, sometimes familiar, sometimes alien, always threatening. Her mind grasped desperately for clarity, for understanding, for some anchor in the storm of cognitive chaos. "Please," she whispered to Jake Morrison, though she couldn't remember why she was afraid or what she was asking for. "I don't understand what's happening. Where is William?" "Where are my boys?" The storm outside reached its peak intensity, trapping all of them in a crucible where past traumas, present dangers, and future consequences would collide with the force of destiny itself. Rex stood ready for battle. Hope cowered in innocent terror. Eleanor struggled against the prison of her own failing mind, and Marcus faced the choice that would define the rest of his life. Continue his descent into moral bankruptcy, or find the courage to fight for what remained of his family's honor. The countdown had reached 0, and salvation would require sacrifices none of them were prepared to make. The gunshot shattered the storm's howling with brutal finality, the sound echoing through the barn like thunder trapped in wooden walls. Rex collapsed beside Hope's trembling form, his magnificent body suddenly still except for the shallow rise and fall of his chest that grew weaker with each passing second. Dark blood pooled beneath him, mixing with the hay and dirt of the barn floor where 3 generations of Thompson horses had been born, lived, and died. Jake Morrison's smoking pistol reflected the barn's flickering lantern light as he stood over the fallen war hero with cold satisfaction. "Should have stayed chained, old boy," he said without emotion, holstering the weapon with practiced efficiency. "Now look what you made me do." Hope's anguished whimpers filled the sudden silence, her small body pressed against Rex's wounded flank as if her warmth could somehow heal the devastating injury her father had sustained protecting her. The 5-month-old puppy had no understanding of mortality, only the instinctive knowledge that something terrible had happened to the one being in the world who had never failed to protect her. Inside the ranch house, Eleanor's scream of pure anguish cut through her Alzheimer's confusion like lightning through storm clouds. The sound of the gunshot had pierced the fog of her failing mind, triggering memories of field hospitals and dying soldiers, of her husband William's letters from Vietnam describing the sounds that haunted every combat veteran's dreams. She knew, with the terrible clarity that trauma sometimes brings, that someone she loved was dying. "Rex," she cried, struggling to rise from her chair as her mind fought against the cognitive chains that usually held her prisoner. "Not my boy! Not my brave boy!" Marcus stood frozen in the doorway between the house and barn, his world collapsing with the weight of what his choices had unleashed. The whiskey that had numbed his conscience for months suddenly tasted like poison in his mouth as he watched Jake Morrison's men prepare to collect Hope while Rex bled out on the barn floor. This was his fault. Every drop of blood, every cry of pain, every moment of terror was the direct result of his cowardice and greed. "I'm the failure," he whispered, his voice cracking under the enormity of his realization. "Not him. Never him. It was always me." Tommy Bear Claw had finally broken free from the bunkhouse when the gunshot rang out, the sound carrying clearly across the storm-lashed ranch despite the howling wind. His weathered face showed no surprise at finding violence at the Thompson Ranch. He had seen the signs building for weeks, had documented the abuse, had tried to warn Eleanor about the approaching catastrophe. What shocked him was the sight of Marcus Thompson on his knees beside the wounded dog, tears streaming down his face as he finally confronted the monster he had become. Rex's breathing grew increasingly labored as precious minutes ticked away without medical intervention. The storm had made roads impassable, cutting them off from veterinary help that might have saved the old warrior's life. His blue eyes, dimming but still alert, remained fixed on Hope as she pressed closer to his wounded body, trying desperately to understand why her protector couldn't stand up, couldn't make everything safe again. "Dad," Marcus sobbed, using the word he had never spoken to Rex before. "I'm so sorry. You never failed anyone. You saved them all. You saved me, and I was too broken to see it." But Rex was beyond hearing human apologies. His military training told him he was dying, that his mission was ending, that Hope would face the dangers ahead without his protection. With his last reserves of strength, he lifted his great head and looked directly at Marcus, not with accusation or anger, but with the same unwavering loyalty he had shown in the mountains of Afghanistan when he had carried a wounded soldier to safety under enemy fire. Eleanor burst into the barn with strength she hadn't possessed in months, her maternal instincts overriding every limitation imposed by age and illness. She dropped to her knees beside Rex, her experienced hands assessing his wounds with the clinical precision of someone who had spent decades saving lives in impossible circumstances. "Get me clean towels and boiling water," she commanded Tommy Bear Claw, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to making life and death decisions under pressure. "And find something we can use as a stretcher. This dog is not dying on my watch." Jake Morrison laughed at the futile gesture, his cold amusement cutting through the barn's desperate atmosphere like a blade. "Lady, that dog's finished. Military or not, he can't survive a gut shot without proper medical care, and there ain't no animal hospital within 50 miles of this godforsaken place." "Then we make do with what we have," Eleanor replied with steely determination, her mind suddenly crystal clear despite the Alzheimer's that usually clouded her thoughts. "I've kept soldiers alive in field hospitals with less equipment than we have here. This dog saved my life, and I'm damn well going to save his." Hope seemed to sense the battle being fought for her father's life, her small body trembling as she watched the humans work over Rex with urgent intensity. The puppy's innocent eyes reflected a world where the one constant source of safety and protection lay wounded and helpless, where the future had become terrifyingly uncertain. Marcus rose to his feet with newfound purpose, the whiskey-induced haze that had clouded his judgment for months finally lifting to reveal the soldier he had once been. "Tommy, help me get them into the house where it's warm," he ordered, his voice carrying command authority for the first time in years. "Ma's right. If anyone can save him, she can." "Nobody's moving anywhere," Jake Morrison snarled, his patience exhausted by the night's complications. "I came here for payment, and I'm leaving with what's owed me. The dog dies, the puppy comes with us, and you people learn what happens when you don't honor your debts." But something had changed in the storm-lashed barn. Something that transformed desperate people into dangerous ones. Rex's sacrifice had awakened courage in hearts that had been ruled by fear, and the battle for Hope's future was about to begin in earnest. The smartphone's blue glow cut through the barn's flickering shadows as Tommy Bearclaw held up the device with trembling hands, his weathered face grim with the weight of revelation. "You all need to see this," he announced, his voice carrying across the tension-filled space where Rex lay fighting for his life and Hope cowered in terrified confusion. On the small screen, a grainy video played. Footage Tommy had been secretly live-streaming for the past hour through the ranch's emergency satellite internet connection. The timestamp showed it had already been viewed over 50,000 times, shared across social media platforms with viral intensity that transformed a private tragedy into a national cause. "Veteran war dog shot while protecting puppy," the trending hashtag read, accompanied by comments from strangers around the world expressing outrage at the violence they had witnessed. The video captured everything: Rex's desperate break from his chains, his protective stance over Hope, Jake Morrison's cold-blooded shooting of an unarmed animal, and Eleanor's heartbroken cries for her brave boy. Jake Morrison's face drained of color as he realized the implications. "You son of a bitch," he snarled at Tommy, lunging for the phone. "Turn that damn thing off right now!" But it was too late. The damage had been done with the inexorable power of modern technology and human compassion. Within minutes, local news stations were picking up the story, military veteran organizations were mobilizing support, and the Montana State Police had received hundreds of calls demanding immediate intervention at the Big Sky Ranch. Dr. Sarah Chen's emergency helicopter materialized through the storm like an angel of mercy, the aircraft's powerful searchlights cutting through the blizzard to illuminate a makeshift landing zone that Tommy had cleared in the ranch's main pasture. The veterinarian had driven through impossible conditions to reach an airfield, then convinced a medical evacuation pilot to risk everything for a wounded war dog whose story had captured the nation's heart. "I've got a full surgical team standing by in Billings," Dr. Chen shouted over the helicopter's roar as she burst into the barn with a trauma kit that rivaled anything found in human emergency rooms. "If we can stabilize him for transport, Rex has a fighting chance." Eleanor worked alongside the veterinarian with the steady competence of someone who had spent decades in crisis situations, her Alzheimer's symptoms mysteriously absent when faced with the life-and-death struggle before her. Years of nursing experience flooded back as she monitored Rex's vital signs, administered IV fluids, and provided the kind of calm reassurance that had once helped wounded soldiers cling to hope in the darkest hours. "You hold on, old warrior," she whispered to Rex as they prepared him for transport, her weathered hands gentle on his graying muzzle. "Your story isn't finished yet. Hope still needs her daddy, and this family still needs its guardian angel." The revelation that shattered everything came from an unexpected source. As Marcus helped load Rex into the helicopter's medical bay, his trembling hands brushed against the dog's collar, the same collar Rex had worn throughout his military service, adorned with commendation ribbons and unit insignia that told the story of 3 tours in Afghanistan's most dangerous regions. Hidden beneath Rex's identification tag was a smaller medallion that Marcus had never noticed before, its surface worn smooth by years of wear. As he lifted it to the helicopter's bright lights, the engraved words became visible. "Captain William Thompson, Vietnam 1968 to 1970. Train him well, for he will protect what I cannot." "My father," Marcus breathed, the words barely audible over the helicopter's engines. "Dad arranged for Rex to come to our family. This dog was his final gift, his way of watching over us after he was gone." Eleanor's tears flowed freely as the truth crashed over her like a tidal wave of memory and understanding. Her beloved William, dying of cancer in a VA hospital, had spent his final weeks not arranging his own affairs, but ensuring his family would have a protector when he could no longer fill that role. Rex hadn't simply been assigned to Marcus's unit by military bureaucracy. He had been specifically chosen, trained, and sent as a legacy of love that transcended death itself. The helicopter lifted off into the storm, carrying Rex toward salvation, while below, Jake Morrison found himself facing a rapidly deteriorating situation. His phone buzzed constantly with calls from superiors who had seen the viral video and wanted immediate distance from the public relations nightmare unfolding in Montana. The loan sharking business thrived in shadows, but viral videos had a way of attracting unwanted law enforcement attention. "This isn't over," Morrison threatened as his men prepared to retreat into the storm, but his words carried hollow bravado rather than genuine menace. The world was watching now, and violence against the Thompson family would only compound the criminal exposure he already faced. Tommy Bear Claw's documentation proved more comprehensive than anyone had imagined. Hidden cameras throughout the ranch had captured weeks of systematic abuse, recorded conversations revealing the dog-fighting connections, and time-stamped evidence that would provide prosecutors with an airtight case against Morrison's organization. The Native American ranch hand had transformed from silent witness to avenging angel, his patient collection of evidence now serving as the foundation for justice. Hope remained in Eleanor's protective embrace throughout the chaos, the puppy's traumatized whimpers gradually quieting as she sensed the change in atmosphere around her. The men who had threatened her were retreating. The shooting had stopped, and the comforting presence of the old woman who always smelled like cookies and kindness provided sanctuary in a world that had suddenly become terrifying. Marcus sat in his father's old rocking chair, holding the medallion that had revealed William Thompson's posthumous protection of his family, and felt the crushing weight of his failures begin to transform into something else, determination to honor both his father's sacrifice and Rex's loyalty by becoming the man they had always believed he could be. The whiskey bottle that had been his constant companion for months sat untouched on the kitchen table, its appeal suddenly non-existent in the face of genuine purpose. Dr. Chen's voice crackled through the emergency radio as the helicopter disappeared into the storm-torn night. "Rex is stable for now, but the next 48 hours will be critical. The bullet missed major organs, but there's significant tissue damage and blood loss. He's a fighter, though. His vital signs show the same determination that got him through 3 combat tours. The ranch house, which had been a prison of secrets and shame just hours earlier, began to feel like a home again as the storm gradually subsided and the first hints of dawn touched the Montana sky. Hope fell asleep in Eleanor's lap, exhausted by trauma, but secure in the knowledge that she was safe. Tommy Bearclaw maintained his vigil by the radio, coordinating with law enforcement agencies that were now treating the ranch as a crime scene requiring protection rather than investigation. Marcus stood at the kitchen window, watching the sun rise over land that his family had worked for 3 generations, and made a promise to the memory of his father and the courage of the dog who had saved them all. The Thompson Ranch would become something worthy of their sacrifice, a place where healing could triumph over hatred, where loyalty would be rewarded rather than betrayed. Outside, the storm's fury was finally spent, leaving behind a landscape transformed by the night's violence but not destroyed by it. Like the family sheltering within the ranch house walls, the land would heal, grow stronger, and continue the cycle of renewal that made survival possible even in the harshest conditions. Rex's fight for life had become their fight for redemption, and neither would be abandoned while breath remained in their bodies. 3 months later, the first warm breath of Montana spring carried the sound of laughter across the Big Sky Ranch, a sound that had been absent for far too long. Rex lay in a patch of sunlight on the wraparound porch, his gray muzzle resting on crossed paws as he watched Hope chase butterflies through the wildflowers that had begun to bloom in the pasture beyond the house. The surgery in Billings had saved his life, though he now walked with a more pronounced limp and tired more easily than before. The veterinary team had called his recovery miraculous, but Eleanor knew better. It was stubbornness, pure and simple, the same quality that had carried him through 3 tours in Afghanistan and would carry him through whatever challenges lay ahead. The ranch itself had undergone a transformation that bordered on the miraculous. The viral video of Rex's shooting had generated a GoFundMe campaign that raised over $200,000 in its first week, money that poured in from military veterans, dog lovers, and ordinary people touched by the story of loyalty and redemption. Corporate sponsors had followed, drawn by the positive publicity of supporting a veteran dog's recovery and the family that had risked everything to save him. Marcus stood in the doorway, a cup of coffee in his hands instead of the whiskey bottle that had been his constant companion for so many dark months. 63 days sober, marked by small coins from Alcoholics Anonymous meetings in the county seat, where his story of hitting bottom and climbing back had inspired other veterans struggling with their own demons. The support group met twice weekly now, often at the ranch itself, where the sight of Rex's dignified courage seemed to give other broken soldiers permission to begin their own healing. "Mom," Marcus called softly, "the documentary crew will be here in an hour. You ready for this?" Eleanor emerged from the kitchen where she had been preparing lunch for their guests, her movements more confident than they had been in months. The stress of the crisis had paradoxically improved her Alzheimer's symptoms, as if her mind had decided that clarity was essential during the family's darkest hour. The episodes still came, but less frequently, and she had good days now that outnumbered the bad ones. Dr. Patricia Hoffman, the neurologist who had taken over her care, attributed the improvement to reduced anxiety, purposeful activity, and the therapeutic presence of the dogs who seemed to monitor her condition with intuitive precision. "Ready as I'll ever be," Eleanor replied, smoothing her silver hair with hands that no longer trembled. "Though I still think they should be focusing on Rex, not on us. He's the real hero in this story." The Big Sky Sanctuary had become far more than anyone had imagined when the first rescue animals arrived. What began as a safe haven for Rex and Hope had evolved into a rehabilitation center for military working dogs, transitioning to civilian life,
a therapy destination for veterans dealing with PTSD, and a breeding program that produced puppies specifically trained to detect the early signs of mental health crises in their human partners. Tommy Bear Claw supervised the construction of new facilities with the quiet pride of someone whose conscience had helped save lives. His patient documentation of abuse had led to the conviction of Jake Morrison and the dismantling of an entire network of illegal dogfighting operations across 3 states. The testimony he provided to federal investigators had been devastating in its detail and unshakable in its accuracy, earning him recognition from animal welfare organizations and law enforcement agencies alike. Dr. Sarah Chen had relocated her entire practice to the ranch, establishing a state-of-the-art veterinary clinic in the renovated horse barn where Rex had nearly died. The facility now served as a regional center for animal trauma treatment, with specialists flying in from universities and medical centers to study the innovative therapies being developed there. Her work with Rex's physical rehabilitation had become a model for treating combat injuries in working dogs, while her collaboration with human therapists had broken new ground in understanding the psychological bonds between veterans and their service animals. Hope had grown into a magnificent young dog whose intelligence and gentle temperament made her perfect for therapy work with children and elderly patients. At 8 months old, she carried herself with the confident grace of her father, but possessed a playful spirit that had never been fully crushed by her early trauma. She seemed to instinctively understand when humans needed comfort, often appearing beside wheelchair-bound veterans or sitting quietly beside children who struggled with anxiety or depression. The media attention had been overwhelming at first, but Marcus had learned to navigate interviews and public appearances with the same discipline he had once applied to military operations. His story of descent into alcohol and anger, followed by redemption through the love of animals who refused to abandon him, resonated with audiences across the country. Speaking engagements at veterans' hospitals and recovery centers had become a regular part of his routine, though he always insisted that Rex and Hope accompany him as living proof that healing was possible even after the darkest betrayals. The legal aftermath had been swift and decisive. Jake Morrison received a federal sentence of 12 years for racketeering, animal cruelty, and weapons charges, while his organization's assets were seized and sold to fund victim compensation programs. Vincent Viper Corralo's dogfighting operation was shut down permanently, with the rescued animals finding homes through networks of sanctuaries and rescue organizations inspired by Rex's story. On quiet evenings, when the documentary crews had gone home and the last therapy session had ended, Marcus would sit on the porch with Rex and Hope, watching the sun set behind the mountains that had sheltered his family for 3 generations. The conversations he had with the dogs were one-sided in terms of spoken words, but rich with understanding and forgiveness that ran deeper than language. Rex had taught him that loyalty wasn't about blind obedience, but about choosing to love despite betrayal, to protect despite pain, to hope despite evidence that hope was foolish. Eleanor joined them on this particular evening, her notebook in hand as she worked on the memoir that would tell their story in her own words. Lessons from My Four-Legged Heroes had already attracted interest from publishers who understood that America needed stories of redemption, of families healing together, of love triumphing over the worst impulses of human nature. "You know what I learned from all this?" Eleanor said, settling into her rocking chair as Hope curled up at her feet. "That sometimes the greatest victories are won not by fighting back, but by never giving up on love. Rex could have turned vicious after everything that happened to him. Hope could have learned to fear humans instead of trusting them. But they chose to keep loving us, even when we didn't deserve it." Marcus nodded, understanding that his mother's words were meant for him as much as for her readers. The ranch would continue to grow, the sanctuary would help more animals and veterans,
And their story would inspire others to choose courage over cowardice, redemption over revenge. But at its heart, everything they had built rested on the simple truth that love, given freely and without conditions, possessed the power to heal even the deepest wounds. As darkness settled over the Montana landscape, Rex lifted his great head and howled softly, not in pain or loneliness, but in the ancient song of contentment that wolves had sung since the beginning of time. Hope joined her voice to his. Then Marcus found himself humming along, and finally Eleanor added her own warbling note to the impromptu chorus. They were home, they were whole, and they were finally free. Dear friends, if Rex and Hope's story touched your heart, you're not alone. At 55, 60, or beyond, many of us carry wounds we thought would never heal. The pain of feeling forgotten, watching loved ones struggle, or wondering if our sacrifices mattered. Like Eleanor fighting through Alzheimer's fog to save those she loved, or Marcus choosing sobriety over self-destruction. We all have moments when love calls us to be braver than we feel. Rex's unwavering loyalty reminds us that it's never too late for second chances, that families aren't just blood relations but whoever refuses to give up on us. The Big Sky Ranch became a sanctuary not through money or fame, but through ordinary people making extraordinary choices to protect what matters most. Your own story of resilience, whether it's caring for grandchildren, supporting a struggling adult child, or simply getting up each morning despite loss and loneliness, has the same heroic power. You've earned every gray hair, every laugh line, every moment of peace you can find. Like Eleanor discovered, sometimes the greatest victories come not from fighting back, but from never giving up on love. Your wisdom, your patience, your capacity for forgiveness, these are the gifts only experience can give. What moments in your life have required Rex-like loyalty to family or friends? Have you ever found unexpected strength during your darkest hour that surprised even you? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today.